ultimately to loss of some 500,000 jobs within a period of 6 months. Now, prices of goods also went high, indeed, as too much money was chasing too few goods. And that is to say that the rate of inflation, double-digit, became one of the highest in more than a decade.
But that's now history, Kingsley. The National Bureau of Statistics early this week announced Nigeria's exit from recession after policies and measures employed by the government successfully steered the country out of the muddy economic waters.
Now, Africa's two biggest economies, that's to say Nigeria and South Africa, were in recession virtually at the same time, and both have also come out of economic recession at the same time, although with different figures. Now, while Nigeria's growth rate has been put at 0.55%, South Africa's has been put at 2.5%.
And it was cheery news for all Nigerians, as shown by reactions that trailed the announcement, though there are cautious optimism on the part of many.
Now, but the authorities, of course, who have worked towards ensuring that Nigeria overcame the recession challenge, are saying that they would continue on the path that led the country out of the grip of recession.
President Muhammadu Buhari has said he will continue to work hard for the country and said that the real impact of the country's exiting recession will be better felt when ordinary Nigerians experience a change in their living conditions.
Now, that's very cheering indeed. That's part of what we're talking about, the cautious optimism that has greeted the figures announced by the National Bureau of Statistics. And then as Nigerians look forward to the fact that there will be a trickle-down effect of the benefits of the exit from recession, we on Good Morning Nigeria today, of course, are returning once again to the subject matter of recession. How did we get out of it? And of course, before then, what got us into a recession? And how can Nigeria sustain the policies that have now conduced to the positive growth that we have seen, 0.55 in the last quarter, after five consecutive quarters of negative growth? That's a major item for discussion this morning, and we have a number of guests who will be joining us in the conversation segment. My name is Kingsley Osadolo, and I welcome you to today's edition of Good Morning Nigeria.
And I am Kirian Umayo. Good to have you join us on the program, coming to you live from the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA. In the course of our program this morning, as usual, we have companion segments which will include the newspaper review, business, sports, foreign, and entertainment news. But before all that, let's meet Lydia for the morning's news.
Thank you, Kirian and Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria. Welcome to the news. Areas of grudges that led to the strike by members of the National Association of Resident Doctors of Nigeria have been addressed at a conciliatory meeting with government in Abuja. Emmanuel Ayimiro reports that the meeting called by Labour Minister Chris Ngige agreed to renegotiate memorandum of terms of settlement to be presented to the association this week with a view to suspending the strike once there is evidence of payment.
We appeal to state governments and organizations that owe salary shortfalls / emolument to help workers to make genuine efforts to liquidate these arrears in the spirit of revamping the healthcare system in the country.
The federal government has promised to mobilize resources to commence the dredging of River Benue and construction of drainages to further avert occurrence of flood devastation in the state. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo stated this while on a sympathy visit to Benue over devastating floods.
This is a fairly long-term, thing, but we must begin that process.
Meanwhile, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has assured the people of Benue State of federal government's commitment to collaborate with the state government to construct massive channels and dredge the River Benue. Yemi Osinbajo said this after touring some areas in Makurdi that have been affected by flood.
I've already provided the immediate solutions
The IDP camp is ready. One of the things that the president wants us to do is to find a permanent solution to this perennial flooding in Benue State. So I think we're well on course.
President Muhammadu Buhari has returned to Abuja after a week-long private visit to Daura, Katsina State. State House correspondent Adamu Sambo reports that during the week-long visit in Daura, in nearly more than 1 year, President Muhammadu Buhari joined his king's men to observe the Feast of Sacrifice. He also played host to his Nigerian counterpart, President Muhammadu Isifu, as well as various groups.
There is not somebody will take something to take Katsina because he's from Katsina. These are the kind of leaders the country needs. He's a just leader. So the best I can do for the president to do something that will show that there is good manners in Katsina, we are law-abiding and very responsible.
And now to the Nigerian economy. Nigerians on Tuesday woke up to the news of the nation's exit from recession, just as the citizens woke up to the news of the country's entry into that economic state. Shikiola Ipinaye examined issues arising from the figures released by the nation's statistics office.
When inflation rises is above 12%, no matter the action that you take to stimulate growth, it will retard growth.
The purchasing managers index again, has been above the 50 index points, including the fact that even inflation is retreating. So if you add all that together, and you also add the fact that even in the stock market, we've seen the stock market rebounding this year.
Oil, which has contributed immensely to our exit from recession, is not within our country in terms of pricing, in terms of also the peace situation of the Niger Delta, because anything can still happen.
Meanwhile, the All Progressives Congress rejoices with President Muhammadu Buhari on the economic recovery efforts which have exited the country from recession after 5 consecutive quarters, as disclosed by the National Bureau of Statistics. In a statement, the National Publicity Secretary of the party, Bolaji Abdullahi, also observed that the country's reserve has hit $32 billion, the highest mark since January 2015. The party commends the National Assembly for the support to the executive on improving the economy and other areas of national life, describing the development as another demonstration of promise kept by the government. The APC thanks Nigerians for their patience and understanding while the economy was in recession. The party assures Nigerians that the administration will remain focused on its efforts to grow the economy and admits that more needs to be done. As airlift of state pilgrims from Saudi Arabia to Nigeria commences this Thursday, pre- and post-Arafat activities were reviewed with the aim of improving upon service delivery to pilgrims in the final phase of 2017 Hajj.
To Saudi regulations on baggage side.
One thing that comes very clear in this year's Hajj is in the last few years, when there is 20% global reduction, this challenge of constraint in Muna was not there. Virtually the space was adequate for all of us. Now the 20% has been reinstated and we are having these challenges.
In terms of comparison between 2016 and 2017, this year also 32,000 plus, last year also 30,000 plus. Next slide. In terms of mortality, we'll say 14, 15, we're still trying to confirm the 15th mortality.
That's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Kieran after this break. Good morning.
From 1967 to 1970, Nigeria went through a horrifying civil war. It didn't matter who was wrong or right. Everybody suffered. Those who fought that war say it should never happen again.
So a lot of people will say, but you were leading the first one. Yes, I led the first one. I don't think a second one is necessary. We should have learned from that first one. Otherwise, the dead would have been to no avail, would all have been in vain.
The words of our elders are full of wisdom.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Kehinde suffers from indigestion. His twin Taiyi suffers from heartburn. Sometimes it's the other way around, or both. That's why they use Gaviscon Double Action. It soothes within 3 minutes and lasts for up to 4 hours. For double relief from heartburn and indigestion, Gaviscon Double Action.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the daring and invincible Louis the Mosquito. Responsible for 200 malaria cases all on its own. Is there anything that can kill Louis? Morphine! Presenting Mortise Power Guard. Its powerful formula kills malaria mosquitoes fast. So, get Mortise Power Guard.
What makes a Nigerian mom powerful?
I encourage my kids to learn new things. And if they get hurt, I rely on the power of my Dettol's 1 capful to fight germs.
My family needs protection from germs. I use the power of Dettol's 1 capful to disinfect surfaces and clothes.
I trust the power of Dettol's 1 capful for bathing. The power of Dettol's 1 capful protects from up to 100 illness-causing germs.
Be a powerful Nigerian mom with Dettol.
And now to business. Recovery data and Nigeria capital markets recording first gain after 5 days of southward movement, government says, are indications of confidence returning to Nigeria's economy. Now let's have more details of these from Leah Kaltun Babatunde.
The recovery of the Nigerian economy from recession is an indication that the various policies of government towards deflating the economy as set out in the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan (ERGP) are yielding fruits, and confidence is returning to the Nigerian economy. Minister of Budget and National Planning, Doma Ododoma, who was reacting to the second quarter report on the country's gross domestic product (GDP) by the National Bureau of Statistics (NBS), said it was a testimony to the fact that government is moving in the right economic direction. The minister, in a statement, noted that 2 major objectives were in focus when the ERGP was launched by the president early this year: to get out of recession and then put the economy on the path of sustained, inclusive and diversified growth. The statement, signed by Akpandem James, Special Advisor Media to the Minister, pointed out that the major focus of government was to reflate the economy through spending in strategic sectors like infrastructure, agriculture and solid minerals to galvanize economic activities and empower the people. Efforts, he said, have also been concentrated on increased revenue generation to meet with the challenges of the economy, which was why government has been given attention, among other things, to the challenges of the Niger Delta region. And still on exiting the recession, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, has reaffirmed its desire to work closely with Nigeria to improve a trade relationship with other nations. This is to bring forward the contribution of that sector to the nation's gross domestic product (GDP). Dr. Hannah Lena of the global body said the effort is to improve activities along the value chain for increased output.
My message to producers and anybody in the value chain is that quality is not a short-termish kind of thinking. So it might not pay off tomorrow in your next little business deal, but by creating, you can see that in overall in the world, more and more long-term standing partnerships are formed that are based on, you know, much more communication, much more working together instead of working against each other.
He also pointed out the need to improve knowledge as well as create a sustainable environment for improvement in trade. Nigeria is set to issue 100 billion naira non-interest bearing bond, popularly called Sukuk.
The Debt Management Office DMO says it has started creating awareness and sensitizing the public across major cities in the country to achieve this aim. The DMO had announced its intention to issue a sovereign sukuk in the domestic market as part of measures to fund the 2017 budget deficit. Apart from serving as alternative source of funding for the government, the sukuk will also serve to diversify the investor base for federal government securities, promote financial inclusion, and deepen the domestic capital market. Proceeds from the sukuk issuance, according to the DMO, will be used to finance specific road projects. Sukuks are asset-based securities, non-debt instruments, and represent ownership in a tangible assets, service, project, business, or joint venture. And finally, the Nigerian Stock Exchange halted its 5-day losing streak Wednesday to see the all-share index gain by 0.57%. Its year-to-date gain currently stands at 32.5%. Next is a graphic summary. That wraps up business news for this hour. Thank you for watching. My name is Leah Katun. Baba Tunde.
Thank you very much, Leah Katun Babatunde, for the business package on Good Morning Nigeria. Next for us, we go to the front pages this morning to check out the headlines.
Newspaper reviewer Bayo Atebi is here with us in the studio for the usual analysis of headlines in our national dailies. Bayo, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Kirian. Good morning. Good morning, Kinsley.
All right, bye.
Good morning, Nigeria.
Bayo, thank you very much. We have a potpourri of stories on the front pages this morning. There are stories on matters arising from Nigeria's exit from economic recession. We have stories on industrial relations, the ASU strike, threats of further strike, the strike by the National Association of Resident Doctors. But let's begin this morning with Blueprint. Blueprint has a fairly busy front page from top to bottom. Kogi workers give government 7-day ultimatum over half salaries. That's on page 15. And Boko Haram's new video, evidence of fear and desperation. That's according to the army. That's on page 14. Buhari resumes after Salah break. And Buhari's minister endorses Atiku for 2019. That's on page 9. That story, of course, is also carried on other pages, on other front pages of other papers. EFCC not investigating me. That's according to Onogen. Chief Justice Onogen, of course, is the CJN, and details of that story can be found on page 13. Now, the lead story has a kicker. Recession exit. We want impact, not talk, Nigerians speak. It says growth insufficient for national prosperity. That's according to PDP, that's the opposition party. Its promise fulfilled. That's the governing party, APC. Recovery will be gradual. That's attributed to the NBS, that's National Bureau of Statistics. And labor demands improved productivity and wages. Details of that story can be found on page 6. You can see the photograph there of the Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo, and the Governor of Benue State, when the Vice President, of course, visited the camp of internally displaced persons, occasioned by the floods that have sacked a number of communities in Benue. Buhari has sidelined me. That's according to Atiku. Atiku is former Vice President. He was so from 1999 to 2007. IDP's items diversion. EFCC arrests Gombe Sema boss. That's on page 14.
All right, now the Authority newspaper. Above the nameplate, we have some headlines there. 2019, Buhari's minister launches a campaign for Atiku on page 4. And now Lalong's Governor of the Year award, well deserved, on page 2 of the Authority. The federal government launches a pre-offer roadshow for 100 billion naira to cook. That's more of the economy. And our federal government agrees to implement a pact with resident doctors, page 2 of the authority. And the main headline on authority this morning is CJN not under probe, says EFCC. I have nothing to hide, says Onowen. Onowen, of course, is the CJN, you know, of the federation. And that the photograph there shows the president and his wife returning from Daura, and that was yesterday. And just below that is a recession exit, APC PDP in verbal war. That's on page 4 of the authority. Barry, you may have to come in here.
Yes, let's start with the latest information in town that is coming out of the recession. The Statistician General of the Federation says that despite the uptick in the economy, growth services sector remains negative. And Dr. Yemi Kale says that this is the way impact is reaching the impact. That is why the impact is not reaching the citizenry. And that's why you have on the front page of the blueprint, we want impact, not talk. He diagnosed that the growth in the economy is 0.55%. However, there is a problem with distribution of the benefit across the country. So Dr. Yemi Kale said that the gross domestic product is an accumulation of 46 different economic activities. It is the positive or negative record of the 46 activities that give us the total of the gross domestic product. You see, there were some positive indications, and that was why one of them was the 0.55 positive indication. Some, there were no move at all. It was just the same. While there were other negatives, some of the negatives is the cause for which the impact is not felt by the ordinary man. And he says, for that impact to be felt, government will have to create policies that spread the impact of the benefit across the nation. There are challenges, and the challenges are the population growth in the economy is still 2.7%, and this is relatively very high. There is also low income per capita. It is Nigeria's per capita income now is put as $1,929. South Africa has come out of recession too. Their per capita income is almost 4 times what we have in Nigeria here. There is uncertainty in the oil market. However, because of the deliberate effort to diversify the economy, agriculture, manufacturing, services have impacted about 98%. Therefore, oil has now been relegated to about 1.64%, and that is positive for us. However, the inflation, which used to be 18, has come down to about 16.5. That too, there has been improvement, but it's still a 2-digit inflation.
Yeah, that's 16.05.
16.05. It's still very, very high. The most challenging of all is the level of unemployment. You have youths that are very restive, very unemployed, and unless that is tackled, that is when we begin to feel
the impact of the exit of the
recession. But there are other stories, of course. Let's return to the front pages. We just take some of those stories to discuss them. We indicated that Kirian already read the story about the strike by National Association of Resident Doctors. I also read it earlier from Blueprint. Now, the front page of Nigerian Tribune has similar stories. Let's return to the Blueprint again from top to bottom. Senator Misal retired properly, and that's according to the Police Service Commission. 2018, PDP adopts Fayoshe's deputy sole governorship candidate, and other aspirants kick. Details of that story can be found on page 33. I'm ready for probe, CJN. We've already read that story. You are not under investigation. That's according to the EFCC. Now, support for Atiku. I am not afraid of SAC. That's according to Al Hassan, who is Women Affairs Minister. She's, by the way, from Taraba State, and she had contested the governorship election. Now, the lead story for the Tribune, a double-decker headline, more problems in universities as NASU, SANU, NAAT declare strike. That's on page 4. ASU is supposed to be meeting with the federal government later today, we believe. Now, the photographs on the front page of the Tribune there show various situations at a number of the hospitals. It says a patient who has been transferred from a wheelchair to another hospital, another on oxygen who's been taken from Luth to another hospital, and again another patient who has been transferred. This is on account of the ongoing strike.
Effect of the ongoing strike.
That's right. We have seen the consequences in the past. Persons, you know, some patients have lost their lives and so on and so forth. But we had a report with regard to the Labour Minister talking about the arrangements that have reached strike. That's the story now. It says patients cry out and beg federal government to save their lives as hospitals turn back many. That's on page 11. On page 4, all set for Yoruba Summit on restructuring in Ibadan today. And Nigerians will feel impact of exiting recession gradually. We already talked about that.
Okay, now to this day newspaper, above the nameplate EFCC probe. I have not read that a number of times now on other dailies. I have nothing to hide, says the CJN. And then Kale explains why Nigerians can't feel impact of GDP growth. The story is on page 8 of this day, and below the nameplate we have federal government is funding governance structures needed for Ogoni cleanup. All right, so the writer says FDI private sector critical to sustained economic output. The full story is on page 3 of this day. And the main headline, non-academic university unions join ASU, doctors start strike today, and all of that. That's on page, on the main headline of this day newspapers. The writer here, though, Ngige, doctors' action violates trade dispute and breach of agreement. All right, and of course, below the photograph there of the president and his wife, we have Lai Mohammed. Exiting recession did not happen by accident, but federal government's hard work. Page 50. Bayo.
Yes, exiting recession. Now we have exited recession, that is out of recession. There are other 2 stages. The second stage is economic recovery. And like the statistician general said, we have to sustain that so that the impact will be felt on the ground. But the issue of concern is patients now who are suffering in the hospitals. Yesterday, the delegations of the federal government and that of the resident doctors met as early as this morning, and they were still working on measures to agree. However, while the doctors were negotiating, their colleagues were waiting in the corridor, threatening those in the executive that if they negotiate anything other than getting alerts on their accounts, they will sack their executives. There is an indication that the agreements they reached have been taken across to the members, and it is expected that if they agree and they receive alerts on the account, the strike will not last longer. However, with the ASU strike, there is a meeting between the federal government delegation and academic staff union today. But before that, there was a press conference called by the non-academic staff union of Nigeria universities. In fact, 3 of them. You have the Nigerian Association of Academic Technologies, Senior Staff Association of Nigeria Universities, and Non-Academic Staff Union of Nigeria University. They laid out 12 conditions for which must be met. Otherwise, they are embarking, with effect from Monday, on indefinite, total, and what the other term they used was irreconcilable strike.
All right,
the Minister of Education is working frantically to ensure that this is resolved. You will recall that in one publication, they said the demand of ASU is up to about 825 billion. The latest development, as the last time they met, was that 23 billion was promised to be paid to ASU. As at now, it is not sure whether that has been paid or not, which is part of the agreement.
Well, all right. Thanks a lot. That's so much we can take. I was asked the other day, and still the pertinent question, is the federal government also owing lecturers in state universities? All right, Bayo, thank you for being with us. We'll see you tomorrow.
Tomorrow is another day.
Okay, so it's still Good Morning Nigeria. We take a short break now. When we return, we'll be discussing our principal item for today.
It's not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
I was distressed to notice that some of the comments, especially in the social media, have crossed our national red lines by daring to question our collective existence as a nation. This is a step too far.
Nigeria, one nation, one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
The health delivery profession is one of the most abused professions in the world, especially in our part of the world.
We be doctor.
Everybody is a doctor. Everybody is a pharmacist who peddles and prescribes drugs, herbal remedies, and treatment procedures.
It dey cure HIV, it dey cure AIDS, it dey cure curiosity, it dey cure anger.
What type of drug cures all these ailments?
Alas, some sanity needs to be achieved before we completely go over the ledge. Your rib-cracking comedy, Professor John Boo, takes a satirical look at this ugly trend this week in the episode titled Street Doctor.
Prepare some rice and pepper soup for him and ensure he eats it. If he fails, shove it down his throat if you have to. Over and out.
Brought to you by Glow.
The largest data network, Glow Unlimited.
Dettol team is visiting schools to teach children how to protect themselves from diseases. Do you know how we get illnesses like diarrhea, cough, and cold? No! They are spread through germs on your hands. Your hands collect germs that causes diseases. You pick up germs from any surface, like when you don't wash your hands after going to the toilet, while playing. And then you can get sick because of germs. That's why you need to fight germs to stay healthy by washing your hands regularly with Dettol soap to protect from up to 100 illness-causing germs.
Wash your hands. What you have to do is wash your hands. With Dettol soap every day. Wash your hands.
All right. Leah Cartoon Babatunde has a background report to set the stage for our conversation on Good Morning Nigeria and the exit of Nigeria from economic recession.
The release of the current gross domestic product GDP figures for the second quarter of the year came with mixed reactions stemming from the prevailing economic realities. Of the 46 sectors that accounted for total GDP, agriculture, manufacturing, trade and oil were the main drivers, while 21 sectors remained in the negative. Reactions were mixed, largely from the fragility of the economy, even as President Muhammadu Buhari insists Nigerians must feel the impact of exiting recession. Given the breakdown of the implications of the released data, Yemi Kale explained that because not all sectors came up, the impact will most likely be felt by a few, thereby buttressing the need for wealth redistribution for inclusive growth.
Create policies to ensure that that benefit of growth is spread across properly. The inability to spread across properly does not mean the growth doesn't exist. That means it's not equal. Find a way to make in the same time people are calling recession, people are making huge amounts of money. That's the truth.
Improvement in oil output, a more friendly forex regime, as well as an increase in agricultural output were essential for the marginal rise in GDP, which the Statistician General expressed concern over its relationship with population growth that currently stands at 2.7%. Current consumer price index stands at 16.5%, with food prices in July rising by as much as 20.28% year-on-year, the highest rise since 2009, and the Statistics Office say consumption and expenditure must converge at acceptable proportion for direct impact to be felt by the common man.
When you reduce inflation, people can spend more. When they can spend more, people will produce more. When they produce more, they'll start hiring more people to produce that more.
The Statistician General urged Nigerians to disregard insinuations that the figures are not a true representation of happenings in the economy, as they serve as a guide to policymakers in taking the right steps to economic prosperity. In Abuja, I'm Lekatun Babatunde.
All right, thank you very much, Leah Katumbe Batude, for that report. Of course, you saw the Statistician General of the Federation, Dr. Yemi Kale, in that report, is right here with us, along with other guests, to further discuss this subject matter. So we'd like to, at this time, welcome Dr. Yemi Kale, who is also the CEO of National Bureau of Statistics.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Also with us here in the studios, we have Dr. Moses Tule. Dr. Moses Tule, of course, has been on Good Morning Nigeria in the past. He's Director of Monetary Policy, Central Bank of Nigeria. Tule, pleasure to have you today. Your smile is broader today than it used to be. And also here with us, another face who's also been on Good Morning Nigeria is the Special Advisor to the President on Economic Matters, Dr. Adeyemi Dipalu. Dr. Dipalu, a pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thank you very much.
All right, so
I think we also have from our Ibadan studios, we have Professor Ulu Ajakaye, former President, Nigerian Economic Society. You are welcome to the program, Prof.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nigeria.
Joining us via Skype from Kano is a regular face on the program, Professor Garba Ibrahim Sheka, Professor of Economics, Bayero University, Kano. It's nice to have you once again, Professor Sheka. Gentlemen, you're welcome to this conversation segment of Good Morning Nigeria. We were talking economics, and usually it is a complex sector, and it takes a proper understanding of the nuances of the sector to analyze it. And let's begin with the Statistician General of the Federation, whom we just a short while ago doing some analysis. Now, and on a broader note, let's begin to let Nigerians understand what it really means to exit from a recession. What does it mean when you say Nigeria has exited recession?
Thank you. I think the answer to that question should start off by understanding what gross domestic product entails, how it is computed, what it means. Because the definition of a recession is going into 2 quarters of negative growth as in terms of gross domestic product. And a gross domestic product is an aggregation of economic activities in the country, 46 economic activities. The overall performance of the economy, depending on the particular sectors, some would do well, some would stay constant, and some would do worse than they did in a previous period. And then the aggregation of all these different economic activities will give you your gross domestic product. Now you're comparing that to a previous year. Once you decline for 2 consecutive quarters, you are in a recession. Once you post a positive growth, subsequently you're out of that recession. Now, being out of that recession does not mean that we are saying that now everything is fantastic, everything is wonderful. It just means that the slump, the decline that you are having has been arrested. You are now on a positive trajectory, and then you can build on that. So that's the first step. But it's good news in the sense that, first of all, you have to first of all even turn around that decline. So it's extremely significant. If you continue declining, you cannot even recover. So the first stage is to get out of that decline, which is getting out of recession. Then build on that, recover, and then sustain your growth.
All right, Dr. Collett, thanks. These preliminary figures indicating that we've seen growth of 0.55%. What is the margin of error?
Well, there are actual figures now, not preliminary figures. But the margin of error in the statistics office, which we always do, is always plus minus 3%. So that's 3% or 0.55%. So that's so you're looking at a range of what, 0.51 to 0.57. It's completely insignificant. All our statistics, we always ensure that the margin of error does not exceed plus minus 3% at the most.
Okay, now let's look at the critical areas of growth, significant areas in our background report, as well as, of course, the various accounts that have been published or broadcast on the oil sector, manufacturing, agriculture, and trade. How do these compare in terms of facilitating growth versus some other 21 sectors that seemed to have been laggards during the period under review?
In every economy, not just the Nigerian economy, you have different economic sectors. And in any particular point in time, there will be activities that will do very well, and there will be activities that will not. It depends on so many different factors. There are 46 economic activities making up our GDP, and depending on what is happening, they would perform or underperform. Some are dependent on international factors. Some are dependent on rainfall, for example, agriculture. Some are more dependent on security. Some have links to the oil and gas sector. Others do not. So some are dependent on foreign exchange, like manufacturing is currently. So if you don't have foreign exchange, it affects their cost of production. Once you put foreign exchange into the market, like the CBN did recently, it causes a reversal in their cost and then pushes up their output. So depending on which sector and at a particular point in time, will do better. Throughout the recession in 2016, you will notice that agriculture did very well, and that's because agriculture was not linked to the factors that pushed us into recession in the first place. Because of it's not linked to the oil and gas sector like many other sectors. You will notice that financially, banks did extremely well, posted huge profits, even though we are seeing humongous profits for that matter, even though we are saying we're in a recession. But you will see other sectors like trade, which affects you and I, the buying and selling. Because inflation is high, people's purchasing power was reduced, so trading activity slowed down. So if you are in the trading activity, you will say that we're in a recession. If you are in the banking sector, the banks definitely will tell you they are having fun, they are not in any recession. So again, you have to look at your own particular circumstance in terms of the breakdown of those 46 sectors, see where you lie, and then determine whether or not you think your particular sector is doing well or not. But when you look at the aggregated number of 0.55, that is everything added together to get a whole picture for the economy. It does not mean that all 46 activities are suddenly doing very well. And that's why we say 21 or 46 were still negative, while the rest of them turned positive. It depends on, and it's a gradual process of recovery. Some have to, and some are linked to the others. So as some start improving, it starts to spill over to other sectors. Let me give one example before you go into now, if manufacturing companies are having problems with foreign exchange and their costs are going up, in an attempt to minimize costs, they might start laying off staff. They might start cutting off what they call other non-essential services. They might cut down advertisement. That affects the advertisement companies. Their revenue goes down. It hits them as well. They might cut down on other services, maybe in terms of accounting and other business, because they're trying to cut costs, which will now trigger and affect other sectors. And the same thing happens when you come out of recession. Gradually, they now start adding back those advertisements, adding back those costs they cut. And then gradually, those sectors start growing. So everybody does not move up
at the same time.
It doesn't work that way. It's a gradual process.
Now, that's an understanding that the exit we're talking about is anchored on aggregated figure. Because when you take up the the specific aspects that make up the 14, that there are 46 actually, items in question, that this brings us to the issue of the impact of this exit from recession. Now, let's go to Dr. Ademi Dipbolu, the advisor to the President on Economic Matters. This might be a cheering news, for you and, of course, the government. But now we're talking about the impact of this on the ordinary Nigerian. When would you think that this will trickle down, from the figures that we have at the moment, that Nigeria will begin to feel the impact of this exit from recession?
Thank you very much. I think there are two dimensions there. The first dimension is, as very well put by Dr. Kale, is that the impact will begin to ramp up across all sectors once some of the leading sectors begin to pick up. And I like the examples he gave. So that sort of helps clarify the situation. That as some sectors that are leading begin to spend more on other things, especially services, that sector itself will begin to pick up. But there's also the element which I think is important to everybody, is tackling unemployment. And it's critical to try and get unemployment down. And until you get that down, really that impact and that ability to boost consumption demand will also be affected. I think the critical thing there would be to look at some of the indicators that begin to signal whether that would happen. The huge profits being made in one sector are one example. But if you look closer, you also see that foreign direct investment, for instance, I think in that quarter increased by 30%, 29 point something. Now, what that tells you is that people are beginning to invest. And usually, okay, the investment may be capital intensive, but usually when investments take place, particularly of the FDI type, not portfolio, what you do is get that people are beginning to prepare to expand activities, beginning to undertake projects, and that usually translates into employment. So
putting a figure on when exactly will be harder. And what I always like to say is that we should look at it from what can you do now and what can you do to support the growing sectors. What you can do now, we will speak about a bit later.
All right, Dr. Deepa, thank you very much. Before we bring in the Director of Monetary Policy of the Central Bank, let's also take the views of two other guys. They are professors, of course, of economics. Professor Olu Ajakaye, former president of NAS. We've always had him on the program. Professor Ajakaye, from our Ibadan Network studios, we've discussed the economy on a number of occasions, having you as a guest, particularly at the height of the recession. Now the numbers are positive 0.55 out of recession. What does this mean to you?
Having me, it's always a privilege to be here. I agree entirely with what has been said by both President General and also the SA to the President on economic matters. What has happened is that the economy ran into what can be called stormy, waters, and you needed somebody to actually hold the system, stabilize it, and then start growing again. What one should do actually is to credit government by at least arresting the decline, but then as has been said by everybody, the benefits of the recovery will take quite a bit of time before it starts visiting on the livelihoods of Nigerians. And I believe that with the statement by Mr. President and also all the officials of government, they are conscious of the fact that yes, we are out of recession, but we are not yet out of the woods. And that's why you saw Mr. President saying, I want it to reflect on the livelihood of Nigerians, and that means that government should do more work. One, focus on diversification of the economy. Two, focus on actually helping sectors that will actually generate jobs. And a key one in that regard is manufacturing, and inside manufacturing, textiles, right? Is a major labor, absorbing sector. Government should focus on that. And thirdly, we should, as we move forward, begin to arrange our economy to see oil not as a source of revenue, but as a source of input to be used by manufacturers and other actors in the economy to produce other goods and services which cannot be exported. Relying on export of crude materials, be it agriculture or oil, will always put us in this very risky situation, because when there's a shock, it then reverberates and then we may actually slip down into another crisis.
Now, let me stay with you, Prof. Now, you have given us an analysis which is also in support of the submissions of the two guests that spoke before now. And you are making suggestions as to how to sustain, the trajectory. You talked about manufacturing. And look at also the fact that there are other things that go with manufacturing in terms of energy, in terms of, investment and what have you. So along this trajectory you mentioned, what would they be doing? What would government be doing at the moment for sustenance of this breakthrough for now?
Thank you very much. And I must say that the ERGP, Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, is a major plank for doing that. And you can see that emphasis has been on addressing the bottlenecks and challenges on production, particularly, cost of production. And for us, a major driver of cost of production is, inadequacies and challenges around energy. And second, inadequacies and challenges in the area of transportation facilities and other infrastructure, services that we need. Government, from what I've seen, is focused on actually addressing these challenges, and it takes time for this, to actually come to fruition, but commitment to it is key. Once that is done, then we can now go to the soft side of life, which is actually enhancing productivity of the Nigerian worker. And that requires training and retraining, as well as providing them with factors that they need to work with so that they can actually deliver the efficient services that will make our economy more and more competitive. What has happened before we got into recession is that the economy actually suffered what we call stagflation, which is having three, key undesirable, trends. One, unemployment. As we speak now, at least the last data from, Statistics General shows that youth unemployment is around 47%. The overall, unemployment in the economy is around 21%. When you find these challenges there, it's a major issue. The second element of stagflation is rising, prices, which is inflation. Fortunately, that is being tamed, but a major component of it is, cost of food items, which has been raised. And finally, the third element of stagflation is declining GDP. What has happened now is that government has managed to actually rescue one of the variables, which is GDP, but we are still struggling with inflation and struggling with unemployment. Once the three are moving in the right direction, then we shall be seen to have been out of stagflation. That is when you start seeing the benefits on the tables of Nigerians in their livelihoods, and also the challenges of unemployment will start simmering down.
So, Jakaye, thank you very much. We'll return to you later in the course of the conversation. Let's go back now to Kano, where we will introduce Professor Garba Ibrahim Sheka. Of course, he's of the Department of Economics at Bayero University. Professor Sheka, if you can hear us quite clearly, let's get your preliminary thoughts also on the issue on the table, namely the factors that have conduced to Nigeria's exit from economic recession.
I can hear you now. But really, we are so happy that the NDS has declared that the country is out of the recession. And of course, I have listened with keen interest, the various debates by Nigerians as to whether we really exited or not. Well, to me, since, though we were in difficulties, but we did not accept the fact that we were in recession until when the NDS declared that we are in recession. And now the same institution is coming to say we are out of recession. There is no reason why we should not accept that. And in addition to that, they have given reasons that the contribution of the oil sector has improved. Of course, probably because of the stability in the oil price around $50. And then because of the stability in the oil producing areas. And then they also mentioned the issue of agriculture and as well as manufacturing and trade contributions. And I also saw a report by, World Economic Report, which talked about improvement in power supply, to which we actually testify that really there is an improvement in power supply, which is one of the major things required by the manufacturing sector to actually,
we're having a difficulty.
We seem to have some challenge there with the audio of Professor Sheka. Professor Sheka, once we clear up the audio snag, we'll return to you. But let's come back to our Abuja studios now, where Dr. Moses Tule, Director of Monetary Policy at CBN, has been taking all of this in terms of the comments by the other guests with regard to what has happened. Dr. Tule, the CBN, of course, had been on the line with regard to what you needed to do with respect of monetary policy, as well as synergizing with other policy silos to ensure that the country got out of the economic recession. Now the numbers are much brighter. What are your thoughts? Are you guys happy, or you still have some fears?
Certainly, Kingsley, we're excited, and the excitement is anchored on the basis of the kind of expectations we think these figures confer on the economy, very positive expectations, and which is very clear that the suite of macroeconomic policies have yielded the kind of results that we were expecting to take the economy. And that strengthens investor confidence, and people who have anything to do with the economy do know that there's a strong macroeconomic theme behind the economy. And that's the basis for our joy. But if you look at the views of the MPC at the last meeting in July, the MPC did say that indeed we're expecting the country to come out of recession by the second quarter when the numbers were out, but that growth was going to be rather tapered, because if the suite of policies needed to really push that growth to levels that are very sustainable were not in place, then we could have come out of recession, but then we'll be growing very slowly. And so, and the figures we have here really have confirmed what the MPC did say. So, and that was anchored around the economic growth and recovery plan, the kind of fiscal policy we're expecting, the kind of releases, fiscal releases, and that we're expecting to anchor that level of growth that wouldn't return the economy back into recession within the short to medium time. So we are really quite pleased with what is going on.
How much of a role has the Forex regime played in all of this?
Well, certainly it has played. Forex is the lifeblood of any economy. An economy that is bereft of adequate supply of foreign exchange certainly does have problem, and it will be quite very substantial problem. Just like we saw in our economy, the reforms in the forex market did help in trying to stimulate some of the output we have seen, and especially from the data we've seen here, the key sectors that have anchored the growth have very substantial forex component.
Now, let me ask you this, Mr. Tule. The central bank, no doubt, plays a critical role in the nation's, economic activities. Now, monetary policy of the central bank, or Nigeria's monetary policy, if you like, has it played any major role in all of this with respect to now the exit we're talking about? If yes, how would the role be sustained along the line of pushing, that is, as you said, pushing it to a level where it can be sustainable?
Yeah, thank you very much. Monetary policy played and would continue to play a complementary role. It can't play a role in isolation of other suite of macroeconomic policy. So within that suite of macroeconomic policy, that's where you find the role of monetary policy. Within that purview, if we say that we have continually maintained that we need to have price stability, that's a key role. Because if you look at the data that is coming out now, the recent data released by the Statistician General, if you look at the real growth rate, you see that the 16.05% level of inflation still does have substantial impact on the data, which makes it different from the growth level in Q1. We had higher level of growth in Q1 compared with, in fact, along all the activity subsectors compared with what we have in Q2. But you would see that inflation still has shown its impact on the level in Q2, output level in Q2, when you look at the real data compared with what the nominal data is saying. Whereas the nominal data shows a more robust output that is tapered by the level of inflation, which has downplayed the real output.
All right, Dr. Tule.
And that's where monetary policy comes in.
Yeah, Dr. Tule, thank you very much. Well, let's deal with this very quickly before we move to other aspects. You're talking about rate of inflation. There were commentators who were always concerned about the CBN maintaining the MPR at the rate at which it had maintained it, and the knock-on effect that was having on the cost of funds, which also, of course, has to do, which also has an implication for the rate of inflation. How are we seeking to manage all of this? Because if inflationary pressure remains high, what is the cost of treasury bills at the moment? At what point is government borrowing in the first instance? What are we likely to see with all of this if, as it were, we were in stormy waters, to use the phrase of Professor Ajakaye, and now that the waters are relatively calmer? I know that, of course, you don't hear the MPC, and you're also a member of the MPC, but what are we likely to see in the policy mix with regard to the very critical rates that we always deal with?
Yeah, the very critical risk we have been dealing with has been the risk of inflation, to start with. Inflation in a period of recession. And any central bank, and I dare to say it, any central bank would, under the circumstance, always look at stabilizing prices, because in a recession, you don't want your currency, the value of the currency to be eroded. So the impression that we are oblivious in the central bank of the impact of high interest rate It's not correct. Every member of the MPs and staff at the central bank are very conscious that we need to deliver a regime of low interest rate for this economy. But there is a cost element to that. It is not hoisted on us. It is the exchange rate, interest rate is the only element that is determined by the market, as it were, strictly by the forces of demand and supply. All the other macroeconomic variables have a touch of policy here and there. But in terms of the interest rate, the market determines that. And if we come out today and say, okay, look, we are legislating a level of interest like the kind of thing that happened in Kenya, you see that there's a complete drawback from the banking system in terms of the volume of credit that will be available to the system. So the market determines that interest rate. Whereas we make all the input and try to see how we can reduce the cost of funds, it is not strictly within our purview to reduce interest rate. But as macroeconomics and the fundamentals improve, certainly interest rates would come. Already we have seen the fundamental increase in the electricity gas. The growth is 59%, from 9.22% to 59%. That's very big. So if we begin to experience this kind of performance from the key areas that feed into the interest rate structure, certainly we're going to have interest rate come down.
All right, let's move to Yemi Khalid this time around. You have all agreed that we are still struggling with inflation, that is unemployment, that is need to sustain what has been achieved at the moment economically. And now, is there any homegrown strategies that we employed, along the line, trying to fix the, the GDP as it were, before now? Because of course we know that foreign countries have also advised Nigeria in the past to, administer some form of homegrown strategies, that could assist us. So was that really employed?
Well, MBS is a member of the economic management team, and I can assure you that we meet every week. And every week, that is basically what we discuss, finding solutions to different kinds of challenges in the economy. Of course, they're all homegrown. Yes, we listen to international advice, we deliberate on it, but at the end of the day, we are the managers of the economy, and we have to take the decisions that we feel are best for the economy. And I think that's what we do. At the end of the day, a combination of homegrown ideas and advice you might get from anywhere, as long as that advice we believe would solve the problem. That's why the economic advisor of the president is also a member of the economic team. The central bank governor, finance minister, all the key managers of the economy have to be there, and we deliberate and come up with all the solutions. In terms of GDP, your GDP can rise. Your GDP is an expansion in output. You expand your output partly by encouraging people to spend, and that's why CBN said inflation is a challenge, because inflation eats into the purchasing power of households, and if inflation keeps rising, especially if your wages are staying constant, it will prevent you from being able to buy more. And if you can't buy more, producers will just reduce their output because there's nobody to buy that output. And it links into other things like unemployment. So if you're not producing as more, you will lay off more staff. You certainly will not be expanding or hiring more people. So when you can reverse that is when you reverse things like now I believe that inflation, the inflationary impact on output can be resolved in two ways. Either you pull down inflation, you are trying to get people's purchasing power stronger, and inflation reverses that. Now you can either pull down inflation so that the same amount of money I have can buy more things, or you can reflate the economy by putting more money back in my hand so that the impact of that inflation does not affect me. Now if I had 10 naira, I used to buy 10 naira worth of goods, but because of inflation, that 10 naira is now worth 5 naira worth of goods. You can either reduce me back to the 10 naira that can buy 10 naira worth of goods, or you give me 20 naira extra. So I now have 30, so I can buy. I think that's what reflating the economy means. You are compensating me for that rise in inflation by putting money back in my hand, so I can still purchase the same amount of goods by having, so increase my wages, whatever it is, keep the economy flowing. In other countries, when they are in a recession, they cut down interest rates. That's one of the strategies. You will see that people will be getting credit cards at almost zero interest rates, just because they want to ensure that people continue spending. Because when people stop spending, producers will stop producing and they will start laying off workers. So that's one strategy, reduce interest rates. Another strategy is find a way to pull down inflation. But ultimately, the objective is to get consumers back to the position where they can spend and maintain and grow production. And that's the link between this inflation and GDP, in my opinion. And these are things that we deliberate in our weekly economic management meeting.
Dr. Yemi Kawa, still with you. One point that I would like you to clarify, and this is by way also of decomposing the figures. The four principal sectors that have accelerated the growth in the GDP, to tick them off again: agriculture, manufacturing, oil, and then trade. Okay, oil has seen some substantial growth. At a time, we're also talking about diversification of the economy. We have seen the role of agri, as we have seen in the course of the recession, agriculture was growing. But if you look at the figures for 3 consecutive quarters for agri, there would appear to be a slippage, you know, from 4.35, it's come down to 3.35, and then again now, you know, we're having it at some 3.01. What does this mean? Is it that, you know, we're likely to lose track with regard to dependence on oil, or what?
No, I don't think there was a slippage at all. Well, I'm sure there wasn't a slippage at all. You are comparing year on year.
That's correct.
So there's a seasonality in as far as agriculture is concerned. There's a planting season, there's a harvesting season. And when you are planting, naturally the amount of agricultural commodities in the system is going to be obviously less. So many of these things are seasonal. It's not a slippage. I think if you go back into history, check the records of GDP over the quarters, you will notice that this particular quarter, agriculture tends to go down. So that's more of a seasonality issue, not really an issue of output going down. Actually, the numbers we have show that output actually has gone up. A second factor in there, less important in there, is the fact that real GDP is deflated. You have to take out the impact of price. So if you're having higher food prices in the market, at the end of the day, if you check nominal GDP, you will see it grew significantly.
That's right.
But when you look at the real GDP, it went back down because you are removing those high food prices from it, and that pulled it down. So if food prices were lower, you would have noticed that agriculture was actually grew even more significantly than, but because agricultural food prices are going up, that impact of food prices was taken out. So the combination of those two, seasonalities as well as high food prices, which have to be removed from the nominal GDP, will pull down the rate. So it's not a slippage in output. The numbers actually, raw numbers actually show an expansion in agricultural output in nominal terms.
We had seen in the past also significant contributions of the services sector to the growth of the economy, particularly with regard to the measurement of the GDP. How is the services sector doing this time around?
The services sector is still struggling. Normally, the services sector in a recession is the sector that responds the slowest, ordinarily. Now, crude oil production, the leading sectors like Dr. Dipelu said, crude oil production does not require my pocket for it to run. The oil is being extracted from the ground regardless of whether or not people have jobs, regardless of not whether or not prices of commodities. Oil is still coming out, so that's economic output. Mining, the miners are not producing for us. We're not buying manganese. It's for export. So the activities are regardless of whether there is a cash crunch within our pocket. So it will continue growing. These are the sectors that drove manufacturing. The reason why manufacturing had a slump for 4 quarters was because their cost of production went down, largely as a result of 2 major things. Power was weaker, alternative power costs were higher, diesel and so on, and they didn't have access to foreign exchange. Now when you look at those 3 issues, foreign reserves went up, so access to foreign exchange was there, costs go down. Electricity improved during the same period, costs go down. Alternative electricity costs in terms of diesel prices came down, costs reduced. So their costs reduced, thereby making their output even stronger. So when these things start happening, they spill over to other sectors and eventually spill over to the public. Because I said this before, in a recession, a manufacturing company will lay off workers. When you lay off workers, you're even reducing the amount of money to spend because I don't have a job. When they now start growing again, they now start hiring more people. These people now get salaries. They have their money, they now start spending on the services. Services is trading. Yeah. It is telecommunications. It is hotels, restaurants, art, entertainment, recreation, the things that we spend on. But until that money comes to us, it will not be reflected. And before that money comes to us, these sectors, I'm talking about manufacturing and so on, have to now start gradually hiring back those people that they they laid off. Their investments, with they stop, their plans for investment, with they stop because they saw that there's nobody to sell to. They'll gradually start bringing back that money into the system to invest, start expanding capacity, expanding output, and so on. And in the process, I'm opening up a new plant. I'll hire more people. Those people come in, they have money, they spend in the services sector. They spend more on telecommunication. They spend more on recreation. They spend more on trading. That is how, and then when they spend on trading, the traders now start getting more money. Those in hotels start getting more money. Those in arts, entertainment start getting more money. And then that's when the services sector builds up. Economic theory starts with agriculture to industry and then to services. And that's what's happened. Agriculture recovered. Industry after 9 quarters recovered, and then the last sector to recover will be the services sector. That's what we're saying. It's a gradual process. And that's the part that affects the common man. And that's why the common man right now is saying, I don't feel it, but it's a gradual process, like I mentioned.
As a matter of fact, the common man is really waiting to get this, because for some time Nigerians have had difficulty, coping with life. And now let's return to Professor Garba Ibrahim Sheka, who is reaching us via Skype in Kano. Of course, he's the Professor of Economics at Bayero University. So we lost contact with you in the middle of your analysis when we asked you the first question. And I'm sure you have listened to other panelists here in the studio and of course in Ibadan. We'd like to take you back. What's your take in all of this? You understand the fact that, of course, Nigeria has moved away from recession. We're also considering other issues concerning struggling with inflation, unemployment, and of course there are other indices too that need to be carried along the same trajectory to see whether this can be sustained. So what's your take in all of the analysis?
We have actually come out of the session, but if I may say, we just marginally come up because the GDP is just 0.5 or 0.5, and what we require now is to ensure sustainable economic growth. Actually, when like I said, I listened to various debates that people are saying the whole thing does not trickle down to the common people. Actually, that will take time. You could remember by 2014 in this country, there was a report that GDP was 6.5. But unfortunately, that was the time when about 80% of Nigerians are living below the poverty line, and the unemployment rate was about 13%. So really what we require now is a sort of inclusive growth, like it is now an aspect of the SDG. And this cannot come unless and until we have financial inclusion. And really, as enshrined in the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, there's really need for emphasis on small and medium-scale enterprises. And of course, that will not be possible unless there is, many people have access to credit facilities. And that calls for banks to come up with new products that will actually ensure easy accessibility of credit facilities to people. Because by the way we see it, the unemployment problem in Nigeria cannot be solved by the recent government policy, the end power, because up to this moment, 2.5 years, only about 200,000 people are actually captured by that program. So really, it's a matter of making people self-reliant by ensuring the promotion of small and medium-scale enterprises, and that, as I said, is not going to be possible unless we have a lot of new products from the financial sector. Now, we have had the components that really assisted the economy to get out of recession, like pointed out by the NBS office, the oil sector, which is the major one because it has contributed a lot. So really, to me, there is still that danger because, like I said earlier, I attribute this issue of exit to the stability in the Niger Delta as well as stability in the oil price. The contribution of agriculture is important as well as that of the trade. But really, sincerely speaking, this time around, we need an inclusive kind of growth that the majority teeming youth that are not working will actually feel the impact of the recovery. And that is where I will now emphasize on federal government, implementing without any further delay the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. That plan has suffered some deficiencies with regards to the late lateness in approving this year's budget, which is, the program is supposed to be financed through the budget. So really, and again, it suffered the absence of president. But now that the president is back, and now that, alas, we are out of recession, this is the time when government should start implementing that plan in earnest, because all our hopes are in that plan. Government had actually put a lot of targets. Like now, the economic growth is just, the GDP is just 0.5, and we know in the plan there was a target of 7%. This is really a very long way to go. So the earlier government start implementing that plan, the better for Nigerians.
Professor Shekhar, speaking to us via Skype from Kano, thank you very much. Of course, we still have all the guests you saw on the split screen a moment ago. Professor Ajakaye joining us from our Ibadan Network studios, and then the other guests that we have here with us. We're taking a short break now. When we return from the break, of course, we shall take the tweets that we have. There are reactions coming in. If you don't have your own reaction in yet, just take advantage of our Twitter handle at NTAGMN.
Call of change, stand up, Nigeria. Change is here and it's going to stay. Change begins with you. Oh yeah, make we go. So let the change begin from within. Look at you, Ogerula. Change begins with you and me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me.
Another edition of TV Guide magazine is out with revealing accounts of trending stories. With the dwindling oil revenue, he says there is no reason to worry.
We strongly believe that culture is Nigerians' new oil, and we're going to show that by creating wealth, our art and culture will be a statement for all of us.
Our cover story is on Otumba Olusegun Munshowe, Director General, National Council for Arts and Culture. For upcoming TV presenters, Elegant Elizabeth Banu tells you what it takes. A peep into the activities of the Presidential Committee on the Northeast Initiative, a mandate being fulfilled. A trip to the Yankari Games Reserve at Safari in Bauchi State brings you closer to nature. And the Oshun Oshogo Festival, our culture, our pride. Professor Adiku, the Vice Chancellor, University of Abuja, tells us what it means to manage a university, plus our regular features, star profile, media issues, relationships, young minds, entertainment, sports, and lots more. Pick your copy now at the vendors or at every NTA station nationwide. TV Guide, still your indispensable companion.
You are still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA, and of course, you know, we've been treating a very, very crucial economic matter where Nigeria has exited economic recession, and we're looking forward to making that impact on Nigerians. And now Nigerians are beginning to react to this conversation, and we have some tweets here. The first one from Dele Jack Solomon says, Nigeria's economy is out of recession, thank God, but conditions remain difficult for businesses. How do we explain this? Federal government must ease difficulties, move from goods consuming nation to goods producing. Through this, the federal government will be able to sustain this progress. Nigerians must feel the impact.
This tweet is coming from David Clement. He says, glory be to God, but dollar is still appreciated over the naira.
Now, Mahmoud Haman, any talk on recession that doesn't apportion blame for it is not serious. President Buhari insisted on $197 while central bank opposed it. Why?
It's still 197 naira to the dollar. Now, this is coming from Festus Akimboyewa. The 0.55% growth in Nigeria's GDP only shows that the economy is healing and government policies are working. And government mustn't relax because the recovery is fragile.
Now, Suleiman Babagana, government should intensify efforts in revitalizing the industrial sector of the economy to ensure further optimum output in the future.
Jackson, this is the Twitter handle for this. It says, not until the effects of demand and supply on the prices of gari, rice, kerosene, and the rest are felt, Nigerians will not agree that we are out of recession. But of course, we have Dr. Kale here as a general, and he says we're out of recession.
Yes.
Technically out, we're technically in, now we're technically out, and indeed out of it.
But there is hope that it will trickle down with time, according to what is postulated. Okay, now Hassan Labaran, Nigeria and Nigerians shouldn't in totality continue to bank on limited crude that we have, but rather think of ways to revive the sectors.
Sonny Michael Makoji, Nigeria is out of recession, but unemployment is at an alarming rate, and average Nigerians still live below $1 a day.
And from Solomon, the federal government must ensure that the implementation policy measures designed to diversify the economy are executed well if we must sustain growth.
Law Officer has this tweet that we are celebrating our exit from recession, but the prices of goods and services are still on the rise.
Akoji says many people have allegedly lost their jobs in the course of a recession. Now that Nigeria is out of it, how many jobs have the government created?
Shakiru has this tweet. Now, we should allow the economy to grow naturally and not to bribe the economy. What do you mean? That's Shakiru. We should bribe the economy?
Maybe the economy itself will explain that to us. Now, Zamfara says, congratulations to MBS and the other agencies that are reformed and working independently. Nigeria is now working, he says.
Akin has this tweet. Government should work with the private sector to modernize our agri sector and improve logistics in order to sustain and continue to grow the economy. Now, those are the set of tweets that we have. We're taking in the meantime. We have one last question for the Assistant General, Dr. Yemi Kale. Dr. Yemi Kale, now this is by way of extrapolation. In addition to the heartwarming figures that we have seen with regard to the last quarter, showing that Nigeria is out of recession, there are concerns, for instance, about the population growth and how this might impact. I recall we had you on the program a year or two ago. We were talking about the population growth. Some persons are saying that our population is leaping at 2.7, and if the growth that we have seen is 0.55, what is the likely trajectory of the growth, and what impact might this have in terms of overall economic well-being and then citizen happiness?
Well, yes, I agree that population growth is a challenge, particularly if it is growing stronger than economic growth. Even when we used to grow 5–6% in the past, we still had challenges creating enough jobs. We still have challenges arresting poverty, and so on. So once you are growing even less, then it obviously creates a bit of a challenge. So I think it's clear that your economy must grow at least as strong as your population growth, and that's why the ERGP actually set a target of 7%. I feel that the prospects are positive because we've grown that strongly before, and that was even when things were not fully put in place, when we are still overly dependent on one sector. I think the opportunities, the strategy now to diversify the economy to ensure that we're not as vulnerable as we are to the same things that led us to fall into recession in the past can only make the growth stronger. I think the potential for Nigeria is strong. I think foreign investors know that, and that's why a lot of money is coming back to the economy. The reason why the money left is because investors pull their investors are businessmen. When they see a problem, they pull out. But the business case for Nigeria as a profitable destination is still extremely strong. I don't expect that to change with a population of that we have of about 180 million. It's an extremely big market, and that can only get better.
Dr. Kelly, we have to really stop you here. You've done a good analysis since your contributions, this morning. We'd like to thank you at this point for coming to Good Morning Nigeria and, of course, educating Nigerians on what it means to exit a recession. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
That's the Dr. Yemi Kale, Statistician General, National Bureau of Statistics of Nigeria. Now, you are still watching Good Morning Nigeria, and they will take you right down again to Ibadan, where we have Professor Ajake. Professor Ajake, I wanted to speak to the analysis now made by Dr. Kale with respect to population growth, and of course the figures being given, based on the exit from recession. Now, what's your take on that?
Well, thank you very much. Like Yemi rightly said, the difference between the GDP growth rate and the growth rate of population actually mirrors the level of poverty. What you see is that the per capita income, which is actually what we should be focusing on, when you look at the current growth rate of GDP, the per capita income is actually, negative 2.2%. If the population growth rate is 2.7 and we have 0.5% growth rate in GDP, then per capita GDP actually is around negative 2.2, which means we have a major work to do. And my conviction, like he said, is that if the government remains steadfast, particularly in the area of complementarity, and that's the point made by Dr. Tule, complementarity between monetary and fiscal policy, and the focus of the fiscal authorities on addressing the bottlenecks that actually constrain production and employment generation in the economy, you're then going to see a movement from the current 0.5% to around 2.5, 2.6. Actually, when we have a growth rate of around 3% and GDP, population growth rate remains 2.7, then when we start seeing signs that poverty will be reducing. By the time the ERGP is concluded in 2020, and I must make this point, it is not that the ERGP is targeting 7% growth rate immediately. The plan is that by the year 2020, the growth rate of GDP will have actually reached 7%. For this, for 2017, 2018 is between 2.8 to 3%. So my conviction is that if government remains steadfast, the fiscal authorities and monetary authorities continue to work in tandem, and fiscal authorities address bottlenecks, and importantly, the international oil market continues to behave, and domestic challenges in the area of production of crude oil is not is not escalating. In essence, it remains quiet in that region. The likelihood there is that by the end of 2018, the GDP growth rate will be costing 3%, which begin to visit on the livelihood of Nigeria. So what that means is that in the immediate period, Nigerians should be happy that we are out of the woods. We are out of the storm, but not yet out of the woods. By 2018, if we continue to do what we have just agreed, the likelihood is that we shall be actually out of the woods, and then we shall now start coasting towards the 7% target in the ERGP. That will be my take. Thank you very much.
All right, Professor Oluwajakaye, thank you very much. Well, of course, we'll come back to you later in the course of the conversation. We just a moment ago signed up the CEO of National Bureau of Statistics, Yemi Kale. Now we've been joined by another guest, is Professor Godwin Owo. He's chairman of the Society for Analytical Economics, that's in Nigeria, and also a visiting professor of accounting and finance at Bayes University here in Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. Professor Godwin Owo, a pleasure to have you join us on the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, now just before we pop our first question to you, let's wait we've kept the special advisor to the President on Economic Matters, Dr. Adeyemi Adepo. Dr. Adepo, you've listened, of course, to the broad range views that have been expressed by the other guests. One point, again, before you give your detailed explanation of what's going on, in your first formal reaction to the news of Nigeria's exit from economic recession, you did say that we should approach this cautiously and warned against the fact that we keep our eyes on external shocks and policy slippages. What do you mean?
Thank you very much. I think as the starting point is to re-emphasize what the President said, which is that the work is not yet done. Now, the reason for emphasizing that is that you must recall that it's an economic recovery and growth plan. So it's like a child with malaria has recovered from malaria, but his growth continues. So the idea is, first of all, to restore macroeconomic stability. That was one of the first planks. So most of the things we've been discussing are around that plank: restoring GDP growth, trying to bring inflation down, trying to improve availability of foreign exchange. Those are some of the planks around recovery. But in all that is said is that we must keep our eye on the ball of improving agricultural production, of improving our infrastructure, either power or is it roads and rail. We must keep our eyes also on ensuring the availability of petroleum products and indeed deepening our oil and gas sector so that we add value to crude oil instead of just exporting it. And as someone has said earlier, we must continue to provide support to our SMEs as a plank for pushing the industrialization of the economy. So the idea is that if you look at the figures closely, actually from the nadir of about 2.2 minus 2.2 last year, we're at 0.55. So in real terms, if you look at the graph, the amount of growth that has taken place is almost 2.75 from that bottom, growing up. So I think it's important just to realize that we have to keep onto that trajectory, don't take our foot off the accelerator until we get all those things we are talking about: more affordable food, better transport prices, people can pay more for telecom services and the like, and people of course get jobs.
Okay. Policy slippage. Policy slippage. I mean, there were concerns often expressed by analysts and guests on this program with regard to the fact that the country was waiting, outsiders were also waiting for the blueprint, economic blueprint of the economy. And then we have the ERPG. Is the government being faithful to the dictates and tenets and principles and philosophies embedded in the ERPG? Is ERPG the magic wand, as it were?
Absolutely. That's the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that there were 5 essential execution priorities of the ERGP. And the first was restoring macroeconomic stability. And most of that discussion we're having today is restoring macroeconomic stability. But is the government implementing the ERGP? I would say yes. The first tool of implementation on the part of government is the budget. So the first test is the budget reflecting, are the priorities in the budget reflecting the priorities in the ERGP? And I would say so, both in terms of emphasis and in terms of the allocations that have gone to the respective sectors, be it power, works and housing, be it transportation. You know, in other words, the things you're trying to emphasize, are you putting your money where your mouth is as it goes? And indeed, it's happening. So to the extent that even the capital releases are trying to reflect the 30% of capital expenditure, capital expenditure being 30% of expenditure. The ratio. Yeah. That ratio. To the extent that you are keeping to that and government is keeping closely to that, then you are implementing the ERGP. But as I said, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's something that you have to gain and move steadily, and as you consolidate as you move ahead, so that then we are firing on all cylinders. Agric is firing, manufacturing is solid minerals, services, everything is moving, but you have to recover first. So that's why I think that the first plank of that plan, economic recovery, we're nearly there in terms of recovery. And what we have to now focus on is ramping growth, as Professor Adakaye pointed out. The objective is 7% by 2020. It's not 7% this year.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Consolidation, and you say we're going to be firing on all cylinders to see how we can carry along other items that are left behind with this recovery. And let's go to Professor Godwin Owo. He's chairman of the Society for Analytical Economics. So yours is different now, because we have listened to other guests who came from different perspectives, of this recovery and what we should do moving forward. So I want you to paint your own analysis, or give us an analysis of what to have, pieced together, to respond to some of our questions.
Yes, clearly, I think the stage had been well set, and I must join my fellow discussants to appreciate the fact that, well, for now, we appear to have exited the recession, as is authoritatively painted by the NBS. But then the issue is primarily definitional. I want to say definitional because that idea of recession originally came to limelight in around 1979 by the economic statistician of the New York Times, which eventually dovetailed into what NIBA adopted, that is the National Bureau of Statistical Research in the US, which had been widely accepted, and that is actually the origin of this current technology. So where I'm actually trying to land is that recession, as it is currently appreciated in Nigeria, it's not an event, it's a process. And of course, it's one of the issues that will arise from the 4 stages of a trade cycle, business cycle. So it's a normal economic trajectory that happens occasionally. So therefore, we're not going to look at it as a static phenomenon. That is, at a particular stage, that is at the level of the trough, you cannot really say that the trough have come to stay or it has come to move, except if you look at the variables, the contributory factors that leads to that. Now that brings me to where we are. A lot have been said about economic recession based on economic statistics, which is obviously different from financial statistics. And where the missing link is actually to dovetail the analysis into the financial aspect of recession and what we normally call the balance sheet recession, which in itself is the actual quantitative hold that has to do with the entire fiscal operation of government, both fiscal and monetary. Now, if you leave that out, then you end up rotating around statistics that perhaps may have been generated through estimates, a lot of opinions and sentiments. But then when we talk of financial balance sheet recession, we are looking at the balance sheet of the government, we are looking at the balance sheet of the monetary authority, we are looking at the balance sheet of the fiscal authority. And central to that, which is always the driver of distortion, is the issue of contingent liability. Now, if you look at the current situation in the country, you will see that there is that isolation of the all-important impact of contingent liability. That is, what is the level of indebtedness of the system? What is the quality of the assets of the country, the quality of liability, and the proxy of equity when you are looking at the typical balance sheet equation of asset equal liability plus earnings. Now, if you look at that, now you will now say that that is where we need to actually come down to in order to empirically impact on production, manufacturing, wholesale retail, and by that implication, employment, unemployment. Now that comes to hit the 5th factor, which is the GDP. Now, but if you watch the direction, we will not be able to have a hold on the fiscal balance sheet of the government, so that we'll be able to tie expenditures to sources, expenditures to commitments, liquidity of the country now. And that is why you can see that at one point you think things are normal. At another point you see a whole range of liability waiting to be paid.
The level we are at the moment, with the achievement of this exit from recession, does it impact in any way to the general economic analysis of this country?
Yes, that's where the problem is, because it is not analyzed side by side the fiscal balance sheet of the economy.
Yeah, well, why don't you, Professor, I'm sorry, Professor, well, why don't you indicate to us, for instance, the financial balance sheet to which you have referred? Unfortunately, we don't have amongst us here, excuse me, any officer from the Debt Management Office to indicate. We have also discussed the indebtedness of the Federation as well as of the states. Yeah. Did the country slip into a financial recession along with economic recession? And is the country out of economic recession now, along with being also out of financial recession? That's the point to take.
Clearly.
Very quickly, yes.
Yes. Now, it is difficult to establish whether we are out of balance sheet recession, because the data does not show that. In fact, the empirical realities does not show that. Because if you tie down the contingent liabilities you can access now and juxtapose it with your earnings stream, to be difficult to say whether they are not insolvent.
All right, Dr. Tule.
The issue.
Dr. Tule, CBN, listen to him. What's your reaction?
I'm a bit curious at the tone of the analysis which Dr. Wu has taken, but I think it's interesting to the extent that we should remember, or should recall, that first we got into this recession because we had a shock in the oil market that affected the finances of government. This analysis is in the public domain. The budget was very clear on the sources of funding. They told us how much they were going to get in terms of borrowing from the domestic sources, from the external sources. So far, the entire framework of operation of government is also in the public domain. The Debt Management Office tells us how much they are borrowing. Just last week, they told us how much they borrowed. So the fiscal operations of government, to the extent that they are in the public domain, I do think that there is a link between the analysis Dr. Wu is putting on the table and the fact of the recession. Because during this period, we have seen the government borrowing both from external sources and from domestic sources. But I wouldn't agree with him when he talks about the government being insolvent or to the extent of insolvency. No. I mean, every government borrows. I mean, and when you have a shock to your normal sources of funding, you go borrowing. And there's no crime either borrowing from domestic sources or from external sources, which is what the government is doing. And it's been approved by Parliament that they could borrow to fund the budget as long as the appropriation was passed by Parliament. So to that extent, I do think that coming out of recession would mean that the suite of macroeconomic policies have delivered the desired results. Now what is left, however, is fiscal policy to fund aspects of the economic recovery and growth plan that would sustain the recovery. I think that is what is needed now, and that's where we are.
I think, but without the financial balance sheets he's talking about, would you rightly say that we're totally out of this recession, as it were?
Let me make it clear. The economy had a shock arising from oil. The economy never at any time, the government was never at any time insolvent. The government was never insolvent at any time. Do you understand? We had a shock. And there are a whole lot of avenues open to government to plug contingencies, like when there's a shortage in revenues. And this is borrowing. The government has been borrowing to close.
Was that shock a financial shock? Was it a financial shock, to your understanding?
Of course, the oil shock was a financial shock, and it was very clear.
All right, Dr. Tule, thank you very much. If we still have Professor Sheka via Skype from Kano, and we get him on the screen right now. Professor Shaka, if you can hear us very quickly, there's an aspect that I would like you to speak to. We're on the home stretch now. Let's get your comments very quickly. Well, all right, that's Professor Shaka there. In terms of decomposing, the causative factors that have assisted us out of economic recession, we're told, look, our foreign reserves are looking much brighter. Diesel prices for the manufacturing sector have also come down, and therefore you're having an uptick in the activities of the manufacturing sector. Dr. Dikwa had also warned in his initial remarks when the figures were announced that, listen, we must worry about external shocks. Assuming we had suddenly again a spike in crude oil prices, our external reserves will grow. But here we are, we remain largely import dependent with regard to finished petroleum products. What should be your concern with regard to that critical aspect of our national financial outflows? Well, the transmission there from Skype is frozen, but let me take the question to Professor Ajakaye. Professor Ajakaye at our Ibadan Network Studios, I'm sure you heard my question to Professor Sheka. Let's get your reaction, of course. Let's get your closing thoughts.
Thank you very much. I first of all would like to make a point about the comments made by Professor Owo. There's need to be very clear. The definition of economic recession is around GDP. But if you want to extend it to balance sheets of the fiscal and monetary authorities, there are so many steps in the process. So we need more time to clean up that analysis. So, but back to the point you actually made. Government, at least as announced, and one can see sense of commitment to it, at least from the point of view of the managers of the oil sector of the Nigerian economy. There is commitment to reviving our ailing, refineries. But more importantly, there's a private sector initiative to actually produce, petroleum products within the Nigerian economy, which is what I was saying earlier. Let us begin to see oil as inputs rather than oil as material to be exported, and we start spending the money the way we like. If these two, tracks are pursued to their logical conclusions, I see the proportion of our expenditure on imported, petroleum products actually dropping drastically, because it's really a disappointment that a country that produces crude oil is importing a refined product, and yet we have these facilities in the country. Somehow we allow them to be mismanaged, to be destroyed. In effect, reviving them, we actually sort that problem out, and when that happens, then we shall then have more money to be dedicated to the important drivers of growth, namely importation of modern technology. The reason that is important is this. The way the standards are being set at the global level around trade now, if you are not able to produce to meet those standards, you cannot export. And in order for you to therefore export, you need to have your foreign exchange dedicated to importing this modern equipment, because most of our manufacturing, companies in Nigeria now, they are operating with very obsolete, technology. So we need to actually revamp that side. Once that is done, the link between agriculture and manufacturing will then become more wholesome, and therefore diversification of the economy will become very easy. So I place a lot of premium on disengaging from importing, refined, products in Nigeria, and therefore releasing resources to be dedicated to actually, addressing the technological challenge of the Nigerian economy, and therefore make it more competitive, able to produce high quality, finished products to be exported and also used locally. That's where I see the connection, Kingsley.
All right, thank you, sir, so much for your insight this morning. And at this point, we'd like to say once again, thank you for honoring our invitation, and please do that next time as always. Professor Olu Ajake, former president, Nigeria Economic Society, thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
All right, and back here in the studio, Kingsley, we have not much time left.
We're pressed for time. Let's, Dr. Wadipe Olu, Special Advisor to the President on Economic Matters. Your last thoughts, closing thoughts.
Oh, thank you very much. I had already emphasized that the important thing is to make sure that we not take our foot off the pedal and that we continue to ramp up on implementation of the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. Just to say three quick things. The first is that even when we look at the finances of government, there's also an element of cleaning up going on. So we had $6.8 billion of JV arrears, which we cleared, which were not paid off when we were earning a lot of money. We have 2.2 trillion naira of debts owed to discos, contractors, which we're also cleaning up. So even as part of that, cleaning up that is important. But even if you look at all that, in spite of all those difficulties, the fiscal deficit is well within bounds. It's up less than 3%. In some countries, it's 6%. When they're in difficulties, they take those risks. So much so that the EU at some stage had to try and, some of its more powerful members had to try and ensure that they came down to that 3%. So I think we need some clarity there. The other thing is about refineries. I think it's a work in progress. If you expect manufacturing plants to retool, surely refineries that are over 20, 30 years old also need to retool. But they are conscious of that need. If only because there's a big refinery coming, 650,000 barrels a day. If you're not producing by then, you know the implications.
So there's no time for us to move further into this because we have refineries. We could also have modern refineries too, to augment what the other ones are doing. Thank you, Dr. Adeyemi Olu, Special Advisor to the President on Economic Matters. It's good to have had you on the show this morning.
All right, we also would like to appreciate Professor Godwin Owo. Professor Godwin Owo, Visiting Professor of Accounting and Finance at Bayes University, Abuja. Thanks a lot for the perspective you brought into our discussion this morning.
Thank you.
Our thanks also to Dr. Moses Tule, Director of Monetary Policy, CBN. Always a delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria. All right, and then Professor Sheka, of course, I doubt if we'll still have him via Skype, but we'd like to appreciate him for the time that the connection via Skype from Kano was well. Professor Ibrahim Sheka is of the Department of Economics at Bayero University. Appreciation to him. So that was it for our discussion segment on Good Morning Nigeria. We now go to our complimentary segments. And this is sports.
Good morning and welcome to sports. Super Eagles goalkeeper Ikechukwu Ezenwa and 17 others have been